Hey, what up, guys? What up? What up? Hopefully, y'all guys doing good. You know that time of the day, guys. It's Thursday, so we have our weekly streams, and on this Thursday, guys. So I do have a special guest, Kevin Miller. So he's gonna be joining in a few, and so as we I'm gonna ask him a few questions. He's a special guest on today's stream. You're more than free to ask any questions that you may have as well. So he's a software developer, guys, front end, JavaScript. So again, he's gonna talk a little bit about his background, and everything. Hey, good evening. Hey, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for joining. And again, so for the first hour, I'm gonna be interviewing Kevin Miller, and he should have some good things for y'all that hopefully benefits y'all for sure. And then of course in the second half of the stream, we'll start doing what we do, trying to solve some problems. I'll try to answer any questions that y'all may have, and we'll kind of go from there, guys. So again, man, appreciate it, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring in um, our guest. So today's guest, guys, is Kevin Miller. So he's going to talk a little bit about his background on how he got started. Kind of give us his just kind of get familiar on his because the way I see it, everybody has a story, right, on how we get started, and I think it's very beneficial a lot of the time to hear other software developers on their journey, how they got their foot in the door, because not everybody has the same path. Some people have it easier, other people have it harder, but it's always good to kind of get a different views from different people. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to bring them on the stream, and then hopefully those the viewers y'all could maybe bring some benefit to y'all as well. So yeah, guys, we have Kevin Miller, and again, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment, and we'll try to get some of these questions answered as well. So, man, I appreciate it, man. I do appreciate it for being on the stream. I know you invited me on your stream, man, and I'm very appreciative of that. And just kind of talking with you, wanted to kind of bring you on as well because I know I have heard snippets of your background because I do join some of your podcasts that you have had, but of course I have not heard the beginning origins of how you got started, and so yeah, kind of tell us a little bit about your background, like how did you get started?
Sure, man. I appreciate you having me on, dude. So initially, I started dabbling with programming. In the '90s, I've always been into games, and I wanted to make my own games. That kind of resulted in me playing around with, C and this RPG creation engine called Verge. This was all the way back in the '90s, and I found it really difficult programming. There wasn't many good programming resources back then as there are now. So, programming really intimidated me. I ended up switching from programming and all of that into finance and accounting. And my degree is actually in accounting. But I'm from a small military town named Killeen, Texas, and by Fort Hood. Fort Hood is actually one of the biggest military bases in the world. But the problem is that it's very hard to find a decent paying job. You have to know somebody. The only great paying jobs are on base. So even though I had this accounting degree, um, I wasn't able to find a job. So I was working at the Marriott overnight, the front desk and night auditing duties. And, I never really liked accounting either. So what ended up happening while I was working at the hotel, I was
Hmm.
teaching my term programming. You know, the cool thing about JavaScript is all you really need is a text editor,
Yep.
type the code in, and then just open it in the browser. So you don't have to install all this stuff on the computer. So that's kind of like how I was able to dabble around with programming there. And also Excel. I had to do some work with spreadsheet, and Excel has this language called VBA, which
Yep.
Visual Basic for Excel.
Yep.
I was able to play around with that and automate all these tasks in the spreadsheets that manually would have taken hours, but just due to me creating a macro, I was able to cut it down to like 20, 30 minutes. So that kind of taught me that programming is very powerful and that it wasn't as intimidating as I thought.
So were you learning that in your accounting days, like learning
Right.
the whole VBA and all of that?
No, actually,
Or was that like once you left accounting and that's kind of where you started like, I guess your job required you to use Excel and that's kind of where you started learning VBA?
yeah,
Gotcha.
hotel job. Actually, I had to use Excel to do these different reports, and that's where I started dabbling with VBA. My accounting job, when I was in my accounting period, I wasn't doing any kind of programming work. Once I was at the hotel dabbling with the spreadsheets, that's when I started playing around with it. And, it was around like, 2012, 2013, where you started hearing about all these high paying programming jobs.
Hmm.
It was a lot easier to get in back then than it was now. It was so saturated. And you hear about the stuff like you didn't need a computer science degree, you just needed like the demonstration of who you were talking about. And, you know, you just had to show off your portfolio, things like that. So, what ended up happening after, a few months of me dabbling around with programming on that job, I just ended up quitting my job. I had about $10,000 saved up. I was staying at home with my parents. I spent the next year really teaching myself programming and focusing on that nonstop.
So what was the job? I know you mentioned JavaScript, right? I mean, first VBA, but then eventually JavaScript. Was that more so because of web? Was that just because at the time that's kind of what, you know, I guess the buzz, I guess, was related to JavaScript, or what kind of directed you to JavaScript per se, I guess, compared to any other language?
So yeah, there was like Python. I dabbled with that at first, but what really drew me to JavaScript was the fact that I didn't have to install anything on the computer,
Hmm.
and when you create stuff, it's really easy to share with JavaScript because it's in the browser.
Yeah.
If I'm creating a web page, I can just upload it and everybody can see it. Whereas, if you're creating something like Python, C, etc., you have to create an executable, and they can't just see it immediately. So JavaScript, it was a pretty familiar language too, like being pretty. It looked pretty much like C, you know. So
Yeah, so you did mention earlier, like I guess before you were an accountant, you were learning C, and you were learning C more so for gaming. I know a lot of people. That's kind of how they dabble into programming as well. Like growing up, like I play video games all the time, right? As well. So of course, it's like I want to build a game, and of course C. Um, Nowadays you got C sharp and other languages, but especially back then C was like the main one of the popular languages for sure to develop games.
yeah, exactly. The difference between like now and back then. Okay, I was back in the '90s, and the level of resources to learn programming wasn't nearly as good. And you know when you're programming games back then, it was really low level.
Hmm.
Uh, they didn't have like a Unity or Unreal Engine like that. You just had to do things on a really base level. It was difficult for me at that time. One, there wasn't like any school classes that I really knew of that TikTok programming. And, as mentioned before, the resources to learn programming on the web weren't nearly as good. So that's pretty much why I gave up back then. And, fast forward about 15 years later, um, JavaScript, all of that, the main thing I really love about JavaScript is if you want to experiment with something,
Hmm.
you just make a small change, upload it, open it in the browser. Like, you can see the results of what you're doing immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas, back then you had to deal with like low level graphics and all of that. Like just getting a pixel on the screen was like a major achievement for me back then.
And just kind of for everybody who's watching as well, in your case, JavaScript more on the front end, not back end JavaScript, but front end, like not server side, but client, pretty much what you're referring
Yeah.
to. Yeah, yeah.
Initially, I started with you know front end. I did dabble in the back end, like looking up Node.js, and
Hmm.
I even studied Ruby on Rails and deployed a few apps with that. But professionally, my experience has been entirely with the front end. Professionally, I've been like a front end specialist, but I do like know about the back end, how to do things on the back end. I was just never pushed that in that direction in my job.
So like now, how many years do you have under your belt? I guess for front end JavaScript.
So professionally, I have over 6 years.
Okay.
I pretty much started when Angular 2 was in beta. That's the framework I picked up, and I've pretty much been using that ever since. Except 1 year, 1.5 years of React at AT&T.
So how would that switch? Because I know I have like I'm not a like I know JavaScript, but I know it more like just enough to do what I need to do, and then I kind of move on because my I'm not really a front end guy. I'm more of a back end guy, and of course I use Python. But for I know I have got questions from people from some of my viewers asking, for example, like how challenging is it to go from one framework, in this case specifically JavaScript, but from Angular to React. Like you have an experience in Angular, because again I'm not an expert in these frameworks, but I do understand like the concepts of like Angular. It's kind of more, it's like all the bells and whistles kind of all packaged in. Where of course the Vue very lightweight, and then of course the React, but at least to my understanding, it's kind of like in between Vue and Angular when it comes to the functionalities. So how challenging or how easy, I guess, was it to go from one framework to another framework?
So it wasn't super difficult, but there were a little bit of challenges. There's a lot of similarities between the two frameworks. They're primarily component based. Uh, at the time, React was more class based. Now it's more of just something else. More of a functional style of programming. But picking up these frameworks are not that difficult. They do the same things in slightly different ways.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. No, that's good. Um, so like I know you mentioned you've been professionally 6 years, right? You've been doing JavaScript front end, but how long have you been coding? I guess total.
Probably coding like a couple of years before I got my first job, and then back in the '90s, but I don't really count that, so I wouldn't get too much. So probably around 8 or so years.
Okay, so at least around 2 years under your belt before you got that first dev job. So how was that? Like, I'm kind of interested on that piece. Like, what was your experience? Because you didn't have technically a background, like you didn't have a CS background, or any kind of technical degree of any sorts, right? So you kind of came through the past self-taught, I guess you want to call it. Um, how was your experience on trying to get that first dev job? I know I actually got a question from a viewer last week on I learned JavaScript, I learned HTML, CSS, SAS, pretty much all of the components related to web development, and now they're trying to figure out how do I get my foot in the door. Like,
Okay.
what was your experience, I guess, on that?
Sure. So, my experience was like a lot of people trying to get into the industry. You know, you hit up all of these different companies. A lot of them just ignore you because you don't have any experience, or they'll get on the call with you and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's impressive, but we need somebody with 1 or 2 years of experience." So, I had to make a game of trying to get into the industry, right? I had to kind of train my mind to accept rejection. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get 10 no's a day. I'm just blasting resume and information everywhere. And, LinkedIn is great once you have experience in the industry, but when you're a junior, you don't have any experience. Nobody, no recruiters are reaching out to you. Nobody really wants to talk to you like that. So I think it was on Indeed or something like that. I've just seen this, this job listing, and it had the little fist buzz question. I was like, yeah, let me just try this out.
Yeah, I remember those.
They ended up liking my code, called me in, and I had to drive. I had to go all the way out there to Arlington and do the interview over there. One of the major things that made me stand out was that I had a programming blog, like on WordPress.
Okay.
And the guy that owned the company, he actually read it, liked what he read. So that was like one of the things that kind of distinguished me. So like, on LinkedIn, I'm always telling people visibility matters, something that distinguishes you. You have to do something that stands out. Like everybody has the same to-do list, basic projects. What is it going to make this person that's interviewing you, or even just looking at you to bring you into the interview in the first place? What's making you look different?
Yep.
And blogs, writing articles on medium.com, open source projects, and even with this YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Those are ways to make you stand out.
Yeah, for sure. No, I totally agree with that. You kind of have to, especially in today, like today's day and age, with a lot of the big tech companies having layoffs. So now you got a lot of competition as well, right? You got guys that have what you want to call them very elite resumes because of where they're coming from. So depending on what they decide to do, sometimes they may have to now drop, go work somewhere that's not a FANG company now. Maybe it's like a financial company, but on the software side, right behind the scenes or whatever. And yeah, there's a lot of competition for sure. So you gotta find the ways to stand out. Um, so I mean, I know you mentioned, a lot of sent out a lot of resumes, and that's kind of, I mean, again, my at least the feedback I have kind of given to some reviewers as well, that you gotta just be sending resumes like crazy. So your interview, especially since did you get a lot of experience? Like, I guess in your interview, was it what you normally hear traditionally? Like, you have a whiteboard test, you have to solve these algorithms that really makes no sense, but it just part of. I mean, whether that did you have to go through that experience, or was it more tuned to the actual job itself? In your case,
One, from what I remember, I do remember having to do some whiteboarding thing, and they also pulled up some of my projects on GitHub, and I had to walk them through what I did
okay,
and explain that project. And he talked about my blog, and I believe they asked me some technical questions, but it wasn't like data structures and algorithms. It was just more so to see if I had like the
like
basic.
understanding, yeah. Okay, no, which again, that has been my experience as well. Um, I mean, I do know there are companies that I feel like try to mimic some of the big companies. Like, they're small companies, but they try to mimic the big companies by putting you through all these tests and so forth. But yeah, at least through my experience in a way, it's been kind of like the way you mentioned it for sure as well. So no, that's always good to know that not every company is trying to be fancy with their their hiring practices for sure.
I kind of feel like a lot of these companies doing themselves a disservice by trying to emulate the bigs because you know they can't compete salary wise with them.
They
So
can't.
how are you gonna puts people through something so strenuous? You're just missing out on a lot of talent by like I know people who have like 15, 20 years of experience in the industry, and they can't even pass like some of these data structures and algorithms questions, but they don't focus on that. They're focused on more practical things. Like, you know,
And I hope that changes. Like, I kind of feel that even with the big tech companies, right? Your Google and all your fan companies, that I kind of feel they may start, you know, um, going down a different path from that. Like, hopefully in the next couple of years. But again, I mean, I kind of hope they do it sooner rather than later because there are, I feel, a lot of companies that they look up to these companies. So now they're trying to be like, hey, we want to be like them. So we're going to start doing what they're doing. But you're right. I mean, it's like, dude, okay, they're paying their employees like literally like the entry level, you want to call it, with the base salary and then, stock options, all that stuff. It's around like 200K or more, right? That's like entry level. And then once you get into the more, go up a level or two, you're, 300,000 plus. A lot of companies, especially around here, like in the DFW area, you're not paying that kind of money. So yeah, man. Hopefully, that is something that changes because I do feel like there's a lot of good candidates that are being overlooked because of that, for sure.
Exactly. I don't really even necessarily feel like the lead code style of interview is it really able to discern what this person's a good program. Can they come in and really do the job? It's measuring one aspect of programming, so like more the efficiency, how efficient can you make codes and kind of solving those word problems.
Yep.
Do they know SQL? Do they know databases? Do they know how to, make all these technologies work together? So you start getting coders who know how to interview well. They don't necessarily know how to code well.
So that's what I was about to say right there. So I think what happens is no difference than what I feel happens when people try to make it into a college. Well, you know the standard, you know what they're looking for. You gotta, especially trying to make it to some kind of elite college, you gotta get straight A's, probably be honor roll, get a high SAT score. That's all it is, right? So I mean, whether it doesn't matter if you're cheating to get the scores or not, but as long as you hit those marks, then that opens up the opportunity to just to be able to get in to that school. It doesn't mean that whatever whatever. I mean, all it means is that you put effort to either memorize very good and just kind of learn just to pass. But at the end of the day, it's like, I mean, I don't know, man. I don't see that much value. Like you could have, I see. I have been around people that are very smart, like very book smart, man. They know so much, but in the same time, it's like, and I don't want to like, I don't know how to say this without hopefully not sounding bad, but like they're easily like 50 times smarter than me because they're so smart in everything. They could tell you history, either from science, geography, whatever. Like they have their background, math, all of that, very very good. But at the same time, it's like okay, they can't, their job is just a normal random job. They work at a mattress place. Again, nothing wrong where working so like at a warehouse or whatever. But like, dude, you're smart. They just you don't know how to use. I mean, all that smartness didn't. It's not helping from a career standpoint. I mean, maybe it can, but in your case, their case is not. It just does no good just to learn so much stuff just for the purpose of learning. You know, instead of being more focused on something, whatever that is, and then being, learning that, right? Whether maybe, whatever it is, whether it be coding or whether it be, a doctor, it doesn't matter, but whatever it is, right? Being more like tuned into what you're trying to learn, and then get very hyper focused and at least try to be good at that instead of being just good on memorizing everything, but doesn't really come together, I guess.
Interestingly enough, man, I don't really see the innovations coming from the FANG company, from the big company. They kind of lucked into one great product early on, and they're just kind of coasting off of it. Google with their search engine, they got Google Maps too, but what else has Google released recently that's just a massive success?
Oh, you're right. I mean, like cloud, they're not dominating cloud. I mean, AWS still dominates, but even then, right? It's not nothing new. Overall, I mean, the basics of cloud has been around for a while. They just a matter of gaining market share, pretty much. I know their stuff. Like every big company does this, and they spend lot of money. Like Meta lost like 2 point something billion on their metaverse, projects that they had. So they're putting money, like they're investing money into stuff, but in the same time, like they weren't the founders of the metaverse or nothing like that. They just kind of jumping on what somebody else established and try to see, can we just take up the market share and own it, pretty much. But kind of going back what you're saying, you're right. I don't think they're not developing anything. They're just finding what's hot, either buying it out or trying to build something that somebody already built, but then roll it out quick in order to, get market share, pretty much.
Exactly, and that's kind of my issue with the interview. They're overlooking a lot of innovative people, who don't have the time or desire to spend on this one specific aspect of computer science. That's why a lot of this talent is going elsewhere, and you're starting to see all this innovation from these other companies. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and again, like I'm not a fan of like the way they do interviews, like some of the big the fan companies. But I would say though, if somebody's gonna do those kind of interviews with the algorithms, I could see how to some extent maybe it does make sense for them to include it. And I say that more so from just my own experience on working on projects where, you know, I have built small enterprise projects. When I say enterprise for a semi big company, but it was enterprise application. But I have worked on projects where you start dealing with performance issues because of whatever, right? And that's kind of where, especially I know in Google's case, right, you're dealing with billions of requests per minute, perhaps, or whatever. Like that's a lot of data, right? There's a lot going on. So every second, millisecond, matters. So I mean, I could maybe understand to some degree why certain algorithm makes sense to know how certain things work, because maybe you will use it. Like again, but I say maybe because you're not going to use it overall through the whole Google's all of the projects that they have. You're probably going to use in very small pieces of it, like Google search to be specific, and maybe some other areas. But there's a lot of different projects they work on that there's no need to go to that level of interview process, you know. And then of course my issue is more like the smaller companies that try to mimic them, and it's like, dude, y'all are nowhere even close to that size. Like you're not building an application that's even getting, you know, hundreds of millions of requests per second or anything close to that. So like, yeah, I don't know, man. That's for me where it becomes very disconnected for sure.
Exactly. Like I feel like you have to cater the interview to what the job requires. Like dealing with huge data sets and performance, that definitely makes sense to focus on data structures now. If they're making a simple CRUD application, like why do you need like an algorithm, data structure, and algorithm master? Like
Exactly, because you're totally right, man. Because you actually don't. So I heard you mention, I think it was today, maybe you on LinkedIn, you put a post out about starting to focus for on backend. So is that something that you feel like? I guess, how do you feel when it comes to your front end skills? Do you feel you're at a point now where, like, I feel confident to call myself a senior dev or some sort of JavaScript master or something, or like how does that feel in a way? Like I've been dealing with Python for a while, and I don't feel I'm a master in Python, even though I've been dealing with it for so long. I'm just kind of curious on your view of you know coding out for 6+ years in JavaScript.
yeah, I don't ever really call myself some kind of expert or master because there's always more to learn. But I kind of feel like, within 3, 4 years, you can learn the majority of what there is to learn in that particular venue. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You may not know everything, but you know enough to get these projects done.
yeah, for
I've
sure.
been pretty much like the front end lead at my previous company, like this current one, and I've always been blessed to work on completely new projects. So I've been overseeing these projects from the complete scratch. So in terms of the front end, they almost feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again, making these form based CRUD application. So when you continue to double down on that path, it starts to get kind of boring. And I'm also more into an entrepreneurial direction. So
Yeah.
if I really want to make my own application, you have to have a back end unless you want to rely on somebody else. So, I've done projects with back ends in my free time, but I really want to hone in on that because I feel like I'll gain a lot more by looking into the back end, looking into DevOps, than I would just continue to reinforce what I already know, or spending that time on these little edge cases on the front end.
Okay. No, which is, I mean, which is cool because you're totally right, man. Once you start, if you want to build your own application, you're gonna have to get familiar with the back end, DevOps, all of that stuff. Again, like how I mentioned earlier, like I'm more of a back end guy, anyways. So for me, all of that is a bit easier. Front end, I deal with because I kind of have to, right? When you're building an app, you got to deal with it. But that's not something that I'm like, yeah, I enjoy doing front end. I enjoy doing back end. But I know when I starting into back end, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Because it's not even just database, or then you got to deal with deployment. Then you got to deal with other services like Nginx or Apache, and things ultimately to consume the requests from the URL. And then of course it comes with if you're gonna have a domain, well now you have to redirect that domain to your server and all. There's a lot of, it's not hard, but I mean there's a lot of moving pieces, right? That relates to deploying an app and doing all the server setup and things of that nature. But yeah, there's a lot that is involved. So what's your back end for this year? Like, are you gonna try to stay with JavaScript since you're already familiar with JavaScript on the back end? Are you gonna learn? Are you gonna focus on another programming language for back end or?
So I'm kind of switching between the two, like ASP.NET Core, because my previous company, they did a lot of ASP.NET Core. Some of the projects I'm working on outside of work, all the guys are ASP.NET Core programs. And I also like Nest.js. It's kind of like it's a backend JavaScript framework, which
Hmm.
is very Angular and ASP.NET Core. It's kind of like a mixture of the two. And the syntax looks like Angular with the decorators and all of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's purely JavaScript, right? It's all JavaScript.
Yeah,
Yeah, Next.js,
TypeScript, yeah.
TypeScript. Yeah. Okay. And for the .NET, would that be like functional, like F sharp, C sharp, or what would be the language that you would use?
Yeah, I'm gonna just stick with C
C
sharp.
sharp.
I don't really want to, wrestle with languages especially when you're trying to get products out the door. You know, playing around with functional programming. That's something. If I was just wanting to learn something different, I used to play around with functional programming a little bit. Like Haskell,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. What was it? Elixir, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't really like. I got so much going on. My mind can't really wrap itself around a new paradigm right now.
So like with C sharp, is that something that you're familiar with today, or that's something that you're pretty much gonna have to learn, I guess. Like get familiar with. Like, is C sharp, I guess, a language that you're already familiar with?
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with it because
Okay.
looked into it. Because I want to do game programming. So Unity uses C sharp.
Yep.
The creator of TypeScript, he actually also created C sharp. So C sharp, TypeScript is kind of like a mixture of JavaScript and C sharp. So it's not super difficult to translate between the two. A lot of the logic looks the same. It's just some syntactical differences.
Yep.
C sharp is compiled versus TypeScript technically is transpiled, so it's not that different.
Yeah, with C sharp, you do have to compile the application. To I worked on a few projects, but not too much. It was actually some years back, but yeah, no, I mean, I actually like think C sharp is a good language. Um, better than Java in ways. That's kind of where they're kind of very similar. But I I started to learn Java a little bit back in the day. Um, but yeah, that I just kind of I mean, there was really no point at that time. It was like, well, why am I gonna learn this language for? Like, I mean, I think at that time I was just trying to learn, and I just got familiar with my like fundamentals of programming. But it was just one of those languages where I think at the time it was just kind of like, yeah, like Java is used for enterprise applications, so you could work on projects like there's work there. But the more I started like looking into it, I was like, if I really want to do it for that purpose, man, I might as well learn C sharp. C sharp would be more enterprise for big companies because they, a lot of the big tech companies don't use open source. Well, I'm gonna say a lot. I've noticed a lot of like big, like your I don't know IBMs or just like those kind of companies. They seem to want to use more like a Java or C sharp, and I never knew why in the beginning, but of course over time I started just kind of at least hearing the reasons, and ultimately it's more so because of the backing, right? These languages are backed by again like Microsoft and Java, what is it, Oracle, and these big companies. So if there is some sort of issue with the language or whatever, ideally the I think the mindset is they should be able to address it and fix it, and they have a team to deal with. So it's kind of it just feels more um, reliable, and even companies like I don't really want to say their name just because I don't want to get nobody in trouble or anything. But it's a military contract company that's around here in the area, one of the big ones. So they use Python, for example. Now Python's open source, but they don't use the version that you download in Python.org. There is another version. It's what it is. There's a company called Active State. I think that's what it's called. And what they do is they put a package together, a Python with all the packages that have been tested out, vetted, and making pretty much make sure that there's nothing broken, everything works, fine, and there's no security, whatever, all those issues. And then that's the version that this military contract company uses instead of using the version that most people just go and download. And then again, that's more so because they want the security, you want to call it, of I'm using a version that have been already vetted and tested to be stable, and we're not going to have issues. And if there is, ultimately this company will be able should be able to address those issues, I guess. But yeah, no, that's kind of was what I end up kind of finding out on why they use these languages compared to a JavaScript or just plain old Python.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it makes sense, especially if you're doing government work. You can't just have some kind of problem lingering out there and nobody that you can reach out to and fix it.
But it's interesting though because like again I've been using Python for a while, and at least any issue that I have had has been a developer issue. Like it's my issue. I coded something wrong. I don't think I have ever come across an issue where it was like, well, damn, I coded everything right, but it's the language. The update. Now I do think it happens because I have heard things like, oh, there's this new version that got released, even with Python. But normally like the beta version that got released, and then there was like some little issue that they found. Nothing major, but it was just some little issues here and there. But again, it was released under beta version, so you got to take it for what it is. So I mean, I guess it does happen, but yeah, I have never had that kind of issue though, where like, oh yeah, I'm coding it and I'm doing everything exactly the well, it's proper, but oh, it keeps crashing, it keeps erroring out or whatever because of a flaw in the actual interpreter. Like I never had that issue, but I mean, it does seem like it can happen, and I guess just one of those rare things that happens every once in a while, I guess.
I think it's kind of also like not necessarily the language, but the tools around the language, like And then, well, why isn't this IDE working for my developer? He keeps running to this issue. They can just call somebody at Microsoft. Hey, what's going on? I think it's harder with JavaScript or something. Something's going wrong. Get everybody on the same page.
Like I feel though when you're dealing with open source, I don't know about JavaScript because I can't really. I'm not sure from the community how good they are. I mean, I know there's a big community there, but I'm just not sure how they are. But I know in the Python community, um, I feel like they're very well informed. Like if you have issues, there's a big community there where you could. And I'm not talking about like, hey, how do I solve this kind of issue? Which there's a community for that too, but more on like the actual developers, the ones that are enhancing the interpreter and doing new releases and things of that nature. Like, there seems to be a good community there, and there's issues or whatever it is. They seem to be, at least what I have seen in ways, very responsive, and it's almost like you don't have a phone number to call or nothing like that, but you could find their um their repos, and you could like communicate with somebody, and there'll be some kind of response back. It seems like, um, where I will assume with C Sharp, I'm not sure who you even call. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Microsoft, but I don't know exactly how that works. Like, yeah, that I mean, again, I'm pretty sure there is somebody, because I know whenever one of my previous company, our IT guy, they had an issue with SharePoint, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. This is like some years back before cloud SharePoint Online was even existing. So you had to like buy the license, like the copy, install it on your own on-prem server, kind of go through that process. And but of course, he was able to call somebody, and they literally got remoted into the server. They fixed the issue, whatever it was, and boom, everything's good to go. So I don't know if that's how it works when it comes to the C sharp language, if there's actually something wrong or not. But yeah, that I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and I know especially with the tools, all that's Microsoft stuff, the Visual Studio Code and the Visual Studio and all of that. I think, especially big organizations, especially stuff like banking and stuff, they're risk averse. So they're just going to go with, the so-called standard. Oh, all these other companies using Java. Let's just go with Java. That's kind of like how I feel. It's like not necessarily about using the best technology, but something goes wrong, they can say, well, it's not my fault. All these other companies are using it. You know what I mean?
But you know what's interesting though is like, so I feel like you do have a lot of companies that want to use, like, again, like C sharp or Java for whatever reason. But when you look at the actual tech companies, right, the big guys, your Apple, your Facebook, all of the languages that they use is all open source, right? Swift for Apple, what Kotlin and Python for Google. I think they use Java still a little bit, but I know they have Kotlin, JavaScript, of course, for web. Then they do use Python. I know with Netflix, I've heard that they use Python for their APIs. Of course, JavaScript for the UI, and they do use, I want to say Java maybe. I mean, there's another language, but again, they're very diverse, right? It's not like I think at least for them, anyways, whatever fear of, well, we need to use a language for support or whatever. I don't even know that's even existent for some of the big tech companies. They, maybe because you're dealing with actual developers, a handful of developers, that if there is an issue, they'll figure out a solution. They'll fix it, whatever it is, whether it be switching to a different version, a previous version of that language, or whatever, whatever. But they'll figure out a solution compared to maybe a non-tech company. Maybe like a real estate. I don't know. I'm just making up like a real estate company that happens to be real big or something, and they want to use something that's stable, like, oh, we got to use C sharp or something of that sort. Um,
I think with them, they have to be able to attract a stable pool of developers, so they don't want to take the risk of like admire having enough Python developers, enough, Haskell developers. So they said, let's just use the language they teach at university, Java, C Sharp. We have a steady supply of these guys coming. Whereas, like tech companies, they're filled with guys that love programming.
Yep.
The majority of the company programmers, so these guys have no issue like learning new languages. Whereas like a bank, probably going to attract talent that I'm a C Sharp developer. I've been there for 10 years and I'm going to just stay as a C Sharp developer.
Yeah, yeah, no, and again, that does make some sense too, right? Like, I know a lot of companies want to stick with the language because then it makes it easier, right? It is tougher, I feel like, if especially if you're the person that has to keep bouncing around, where 1 month you're working JavaScript, the next month doing C Sharp, then the next month doing Golang or whatever. That's not easy for sure. To keep if you have to bounce around with different languages. So
And especially if you have, it's to say like you have like a real estate company, you don't want all your different projects to be in different languages, because you can't have developers bounce from one project to the next. Like I don't know Python, so how am I gonna jump on a Python project once this one's over? I think they kind of think like that.
well, you're gonna have more cost too, right? Because if you really need another developer for that language, now you gotta have two guys when you could have just had one that could bounce over. But so yeah, no, for sure that'll kind of help minimize costs, keeping everything in one language for sure, which makes sense, right? I know with us, like some of the work that we do, um, everything we use Python for the back end, then of course JavaScript for the front end, and there's a little bit of C Sharp that we use for like web service, but pretty much that's about it. Everything's pretty consistent. Python, then of course JavaScript. And those are really the only two languages that we use. Again, if there's a use case to switch up the back end, then do it all based off that use case. But in general, at least in my experience, man, when you're dealing with back end and the majority of the language out there is would not have a problem handling, let's say, thousands of requests per minute, even hundreds of thousands of requests per minute. It won't have an issue. I think what would happen, what you will probably see fail first, if it does fail, would be probably database performance on doing all the read and writes and things of that nature. If it's not configured properly or maybe not indexed properly or whatever, that's probably where, if anything, you will see some bottlenecks first. Then of course after that, maybe it's a language, but at least by then though, if you're dealing with like millions of requests per minute on an app, then that's at least that your app is doing good because it's being hit a lot. And short term, you could always give it more resource, but then maybe by then that's where it becomes a change of plan and redo the back end to another language type deal that's more efficient for the amount of requests that you're getting, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Master. We're getting close towards the end of the stream. So just kind of before we finish off, what are your plans for this year? Like, what I know you mentioned you're gonna get familiar to back end. Do you have any other plans that you're gonna focus on for 2023 that you're trying to get done?
Yeah, so I'm really trying to move into a more entrepreneurial path, with the Coder Conversation podcast and developing apps outside of work. Because if you just look recently, you've seen all these massive layoffs. Like on LinkedIn, it's like 80% of the posts are people looking
Yep.
for a new job. They're being let go from Microsoft, from Amazon. But these are the big prestigious companies, and they were just let go just like that. So, how's that going to affect the market when you're competing against guys from fame?
Mm-hmm.
They're competing for those open jobs. It's kind of like a downward pressure on salaries and all of that. So I really feel like you just see how disposable you are in corporate America. So you have to start making inroads into doing your own thing. Like you don't necessarily have to quit your job and try to start a business, but in your free time, do something entrepreneurial, make that attempt. That's really what I'm attempting to do. that's pretty much my focus. Like the podcast is a big focus, and then launching a company's application.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Because you're totally right, man. You want to try to build as many streams of income as you can. I'm a big believer in that, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I started doing YouTube as well. Um, to help, a lot of my videos is more like I get a lot of requests, so a lot of the video that I make related to like, you know, Python, SharePoint, this or that or whatever it is because I got a request from a viewer like, hey, can you make a video over X, Y, and Z, for example. So you know, a lot of the stuff I've been making have been for viewers based on requests that I get. But I'm a big believer of you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Damn it, I just had it in my mind. Um, ex- not exposing yourself, but putting yourself out there from a sense of you know like you know again whether like in my case YouTube, but there's many other whatever it could be podcasts, it could be YouTube videos, it could, whatever. And branding, that was the word I'm looking at. Branding, like self branding, right? Branding yourself. I mean, you see with all of these, a lot of the YouTubers nowadays, you know, Mr. Beast is a good example. I mean, he built a brand where people know who he is. Now he's starting to build businesses on top of his brand with his burger place and, of course, his YouTube videos and other stuff. There, dude, he has like a few businesses operating right now that are just, they're not really mainstream because everybody knows them for his YouTube videos, like his giveaways. But dude, he has a lot. There's a lot that he's doing, and I'm starting to see other people. You got like Jake Paul and Logan Paul, right? All of the branding aspect of it open up opportunities to WWE and boxing and you know Prime Drink and whatever. But and again, they're on the high end for sure. But there's a lot of people, even more on the lower end, you know, that are you know building a nice little audience, right? Nice little following, you know, 10,000, 50,000, you know, kind of you know following, and that's where the branding comes in. You know, that you have a core following, and it opens up opportunities. You know, other business opportunities as well, or even just open up work opportunities from a sense of you know somebody wants to hire you because they see what, or they want to work with you because they're able to see what you're all about type deal. I mean, again, well, whatever it is, but for me, it was more for the branding of it, and you know, that's kind of like for me this year. It's kind of I'm doubling down on YouTube for sure, and gonna hit it hard and see you know what I can make out of it by the end of this year. But yeah, man. I mean, I'm a big fan of, but it's tough. I would say that like it is tough because um, I think a lot of people start, you know, posting or making videos or whatever it is, and what happens, it does. Most people it eventually fades off. It could be for different reasons. Maybe they start doing something else that's more productive, perhaps, or they just you know you're not seeing the results, so it is becomes more easier to just kind of stop it and be done with it. But man, I do feel it's remember like Mr. Beast, he did a podcast. He mentioned like you know for people that are getting in, and his story was I feel like he did not become famous overnight either. He been making YouTube videos. He was like what 13 or whatever for like X amount of years to eventually, of course, he got to the point where he kind of blew up. But one of the things that he mentioned was like the first 100 video that you make, just think of them as trash. Like make them, put them out there. Don't focus too much on the editing and doing everything perfect. Just put them out there. And 'cause what's going to happen is as you start making videos, you start finding your own process that will you know speed line what you're doing, optimize what you're doing, and things will just get better, you know, naturally over time. And then on top of that, you know, it's normally takes about 100 videos where eventually then you start getting traction, right? People start
Yeah.
joining, and so it's you know, it's one of those deals where you know, just it's a matter of pushing videos and try to push some quality videos, but at the same time, it's like doesn't have to be perfect either. Just put out there, try to get at least the message right. As long as the message is valid, that's really what matters to begin with.
Yeah, the first year or so, the first year or two, you're not gonna get a whole bunch of views. It can be first, maybe you gotta ignore the view.
Yep.
Just from me sticking with the just from me sticking with the podcast, I've met like a whole bunch of amazing people that I wouldn't have otherwise met. I met you, Ryan Fuller, a whole bunch of different people. And like for me, I've been noticing a lot of like CEOs, CTOs, stuff like that,
Hmm.
looking at me, reaching out to me, and it's because of my posts on LinkedIn and my podcast. I don't have like a bunch of numbers, but that visibility
Yeah.
gives me exposure to the right audience.
Exactly, right? I mean that's the thing that really matters right there, right? It may not go out to millions of viewers, but even if it goes out to 10, those 10 could be some key viewers that are watching that could, open up either connections, how you mentioned, or opportunities in the future. Who knows, right? So that's very beneficial for sure. So all right, man. So I know we already hit that 1 hour mark, and again, man, I do appreciate it for being on the stream, and yeah. So normally I do my stream. It's a 2 hour stream. First half I normally talk about different topics. In this case, didn't kind of interviewed you. Second half, which is the next hour, we kind of go over and I actually solve some problems with the viewers. They ask me coding issues or AWS issues like, hey, can we test this out or can we solve this? So I'll literally bring up my editor, open up AWS, and we start going at it and trying to see what we could solve live. So that's kind of like what we do, what I've been doing here on the on my stream, anyways. So trying to do a little bit different, interact with the viewers, solving problems. That's kind of like the go. I saw problems off screen for sure, but I try to solve some live on screen, and as well. So we'll see if we get some questions related to that. But again, man, I do appreciate it for joining the stream, and yeah, man, I'll keep in touch, and we'll talk later.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. I'll definitely catch up with you.
All right, man, take care.
All right, man.
Peace.